My family stole $50,000 from me for a luxury cruise while I was supporting them. But when I cut the money off, my lazy brother lost everything. And now his salary is being garnished, paying a $93K debt he'll never forget. I'm 29 years old. I work as a creative director at an advertising agency in Chicago, and until about 6 months ago, I was basically financing my entire family's life. And when I say entire, I mean entire. From my parents' mortgage to the pizzas my younger brother ordered for delivery 3 times a week while playing video games in the basement. I guess I should start by explaining how I ended up in such a ridiculous situation, because when people ask me why I let things go so far, I don't even have a clear answer myself. I grew up in a Chicago suburb, nothing special. Typical middle class. My brother Mason is 4 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, he was always the golden child of the family. You know, that type of kid who could do anything, and my parents would find a way to justify it. He'd get bad grades, and it was because the teachers didn't understand him. He wouldn't help around the house, and it was because he was tired or needed his space. I, on the other hand, was always the responsible one, the one who got good grades, who worked part-time in high school, who went to college on a partial scholarship that I supplemented by working as a waiter on weekends. Mason tried going to college for like 2 semesters, failed almost everything, and just stopped going. My parents didn't even pressure him much. They basically said college wasn't for everyone and that he'd find his way eventually. The thing is, Mason never found his way. He's 25 now and has been basically unemployed since he left college at 19. He lives in my parents' basement, plays video games all day, orders takeout, and occasionally says he's looking for work, but never gets past sending like 3 resumes before giving up. And my parents, especially my mom, still treat him like he's a teenager who needs time to mature. My dad is quieter, like the type who avoids conflict, but he doesn't do anything to change the situation either. I graduated, got a decent marketing job, first. And then about 3 years ago, I got promoted to creative director with a pretty good salary. I'm not gonna lie. I make around $120,000 a year, which in Chicago is enough to live well, but it's not like I'm swimming in money either. The problem started about 5 years ago when my dad had health issues. Nothing serious, but enough that he had to reduce his work hours, and my mom never worked full-time. She always had little jobs here and there, but nothing stable. They started falling behind on the mortgage, and I, being the responsible son that I am, offered to help temporarily. Temporarily turned into 5 years. I started paying them like $500 a month, then $1,000, and eventually ended up giving them $2,000 monthly just for the mortgage. On top of that, I was paying their electricity, internet, cable, my mom's car insurance, and basically any emergency that came up. My dad eventually had to get a part-time job at a hardware store because things got really tough, but even with that, without my help, they couldn't make ends meet. And Mason there, in the basement, not contributing a cent. What drove me crazy was that every time I suggested that Mason could, I don't know, work at a McDonald's or something, my mom would come at me saying I was too hard on him, that he was going through a difficult time, that he was depressed. And I'm like, depressed? The guy spends 14 hours a day playing Fortnite and eating Doritos. He's not depressed, he's comfortable. But anyway, I kept paying because, honestly, I felt guilty. My parents raised me, gave me a roof over my head, and I felt it was my obligation to help them now that I was in a better financial position. Things started to change about 8 months ago. I had been saving to buy myself an apartment. I had like $40,000 saved after years of living in a kinda crappy studio, so I could help my family and still save something. One day, I was in a meeting at work, and I get a call from an unknown number. Normally I don't answer, but for some reason that day I did. It was Thomas, a representative from my bank, Chase, and he tells me there's an unusual charge on my credit card that they want to verify. A charge of $50,000 to a travel agency. I froze. I tell him I definitely didn't make that charge, that it must be fraud, and he tells me they're going to investigate, but they need me to go to a branch to fill out some forms. I run out of the office, tell my boss I have a family emergency, which technically was true, although I didn't know it yet, and go to the bank. Thomas shows me the charge. It's to a travel agency specializing in luxury cruises, and the charge was made 2 days ago. He tells me the purchase was for a Mediterranean cruise departing in 3 weeks, all-inclusive, luxury suite, the whole package. I was in shock, like I couldn't process what I was hearing. Who has access to my card? And then I remembered. About a year ago, my mom asked me for my card to make an online purchase because hers was blocked or something, and I gave it to her without thinking much about it. I told her to give it back to me afterwards, and she did. But apparently she saved the information. My blood boiled instantly. I tell Thomas I need to make some calls before proceeding with the dispute, and I leave the bank calling my mom. She answers all casual, like, "Hi, Mijo, how are you?" And I just blurt out without preamble. "Why is there a charge of $50,000 on my credit card for a cruise?" Silence. Long silence. And then I hear her tell someone else, "It's Gabriel," and my dad in the background says something I can't hear. Finally, my mom responds, and I swear the tone she used was like I was the irrational one. She tells me, "Oh, Mijo, we wanted to surprise you. We're going on a family vacation. It's been years since we all traveled together." "A surprise?" I tell her. "A surprise for $50,000 with my money without asking me?" And she comes at me with how I always say I want the family to spend time together, that Mason needs to get out of the house and see the world, that they deserve a vacation after all the problems they've had. I tell her I'm on my way to their house, and they better be there because we're going to have a very serious conversation. I got to my parents' house in 20 minutes. I drove like crazy. I walk in, and there are all three of them, my mom, my dad, and Mason, sitting in the living room like they're about to have an intervention with me. My mom immediately starts with her speech about how I'm selfish, that they raised me, that I never ask them for anything, that I work a lot and make good money. My dad is quiet, looking at the floor, and Mason has the nerve to be on his phone like this doesn't concern him. I tell them that doesn't matter, that it's my money, that they have no right to use my card without permission. That $50,000 is insane, that I've been supporting them financially for years, while Mason doesn't lift a finger. That's when Mason looks up and tells me, "It's not my fault, I haven't found a good job like you." I almost lost my mind. I tell him the difference is that I looked for work, that I worked at whatever was necessary, that I made an effort, while he's spent 6 years doing absolutely nothing but spending the money I give them. My mom interrupts me and tells me that if I really loved them, I'd understand they just wanted a nice vacation. That family is the most important thing. That someday when I have kids, I'll understand. And I tell her, "You know what? I'm going to dispute the charge with the bank. I'm going to report it as fraud, because that's exactly what it is. And starting today, I'm not giving you a single cent more." My mom starts crying. My dad finally speaks and says not to be extreme, that we can talk things through. And Mason calls me a son of a bitch and goes to the basement, slamming the door. I left and went back to the bank. I told Thomas I wanted to proceed with the fraud dispute and that I needed to cancel that card and get a new one. While we were filling out the forms, Thomas reviews my account more thoroughly and asks me if I want them to check other recent charges because there's a pattern of unusual spending. I tell him yes, please review everything. And that's where things get worse. Much worse. Turns out the cruise wasn't the only thing. In the last 6 months, my family had been making charges to my card regularly. Not amounts so large that I'd notice immediately, because I didn't review the statements in detail. I just paid the total each month without questioning much. But there it all was. Charges at expensive restaurants, clothing stores, Best Buy, Amazon, video game stores. Thomas shows me the list and tells me they add up to approximately $43,000 additional dollars. $43,000. Added to the $50,000 from the cruise, we're talking about $93,000 total. I sat there in the bank, probably for like 15 minutes without saying anything, just staring at the numbers on the screen. Thomas asks me if I'm okay, and I tell him, "No, I'm definitely not okay, but let's dispute every charge." He explains that the process is going to take time, that the bank is going to investigate, that they're going to contact my parents because technically they made the purchases, and that this is probably going to get ugly. I tell him I don't care, go ahead with everything. That night, after processing it all, I sent a text message to the family group chat we have, which ironically my mom created years ago to keep us connected. I wrote them, probably too calmly considering the circumstances, that I had just discovered that not only the cruise, but they'd been using my card without permission for months. That in total, they'd spent $93,000 of my money. That the bank was investigating everything as fraud. And that from that moment, I was cutting off all financial help. No exceptions. That they should find a way to pay their own bills because I wasn't going to be their ATM anymore. My mom responded with like 10 messages in a row, basically saying I was exaggerating, that family helps each other, that they gave me everything when I was a kid, that I was ungrateful. Mason put a laughing emoji and wrote something like, "Good luck paying your bills without help then." My dad didn't write anything. I muted the chat and never responded again. The following months were, I don't know how to describe it, like liberating, but also horrible. The bank processed the fraud disputes and basically told my parents they had to return the money. The cruise got canceled, obviously, although the travel agency kept a deposit of like $10,000 because it was too close to the departure date. The other charges? The bank reversed almost all of them because I could prove I didn't authorize those expenses, but that meant my family now had a debt of $93,000 between them and the bank, plus interest, plus penalties. I moved to a new apartment in downtown Chicago, farther from my parents. A nice 2-bedroom place that, honestly, I deserved after years of living like a student to be able to help them. I blocked their numbers for a while because I couldn't deal with the constant messages from my mom begging me to reconsider. That family was sacred, that this was going to destroy them. Through my cousin Emily, I found out how things were going. Emily was always kind of a gossip, but in a good way, like the one who keeps you in the loop without judging. She told me that debt collectors started calling the house constantly, that my mom had an emotional breakdown, and that Mason finally, for the first time in years, had to look for real work. He got something at a restaurant, I think a diner, flipping burgers for minimum wage. Emily sent me a photo she saw on social media of Mason in his uniform, looking miserable. I'm not gonna lie, I felt a dark satisfaction seeing that. But Mason, being Mason, only lasted 2 weeks at that job. He found it too hard, too demeaning, too whatever. He quit and went back to the basement. Meanwhile, my parents started falling behind on the mortgage because without my $2,000 monthly dollars plus what I was paying for utilities, they simply couldn't make it. My dad was working at the hardware store, but it wasn't enough, and my mom eventually had to look for a full-time job for the first time in decades. She ended up at a Walmart. One day, about 4 months after all the initial drama, there was a knock on my door. It was my parents. I don't know how they got my address because I hadn't given it to them. I assume Emily or some other relative gave it to them. I let them in because, well, they're my parents. No matter how angry I was, they sat on my new couch, and my mom started crying before anyone said anything. My dad finally spoke, and he told me they needed help, that the bank was going to foreclose on the mortgage if they didn't catch up on payments, that they were 3 months behind, that they were going to lose the house. I asked him about Mason. Where was he in all this? Why wasn't he helping? My dad told me Mason was looking for work, but it was difficult, that the economy was bad, that blah blah blah. I told him to stop justifying him, that Mason was 25 years old and it was time for him to grow up. My mom looked at me with those mother eyes that make you feel guilty and said, "Are you really going to let us lose our house after everything we did for you?" And that's where something in me just broke, or rather, fixed itself. I told them yes, I was going to let them lose the house because it wasn't my responsibility to save them from the consequences of their own decisions. That they chose to steal from me because that's what they did, steal. That they chose to protect Mason and allow him to be a useless bum for years, and now they had to live with those decisions. My mom stood up and told me I was a monster, that she never thought her own son would be so cruel, and they left. I didn't see them again for months. Emily kept me informed, told me they did indeed lose the house, that they had to sell in a short sale and move to a small apartment in a not-so-nice area of Chicago, that Mason still couldn't get stable work, that my mom hated me, and told everyone in the family that I had abandoned them in their worst moment. But then something interesting happened. The debt collectors didn't give up. They started going directly after Mason because, technically, many of those charges were related to his video game purchases, his clothes, his food orders. And since Mason was now 25 years old and wasn't a minor when the purchases were made, he was legally responsible. They took him to civil court. Emily sent me photos from the proceedings. She was there in court as a spectator because she's nosy like that, but I appreciated it. She told me Mason showed up in ripped jeans and a hoodie, that the judge basically asked him if he had any defense, and Mason said something like he didn't know he was using his brother's card without permission, which was obviously a lie. The judge ruled that Mason had to pay like $93,000 plus court costs and legal fees, basically the full amount. Obviously, Mason doesn't have $93,000. He doesn't even have $93 probably. But the judge ordered that when Mason got a job, his salary would be garnished until he paid the debt. And finally, after more pressure from my parents who could no longer support him, Mason got a job at a warehouse, one of those Amazon jobs where you basically walk like 15 miles a day packing boxes. Salary not too bad, like $18 an hour, but 25% of his paycheck started being garnished automatically from the first check. The cherry on top was when, about 2 months ago, Emily sent me a video that someone had taken in the parking lot of the warehouse where Mason works. It was his car, a 2018 Honda Civic that my parents had bought him years ago when they still had money, being towed. Apparently Mason also owed car payments and the bank finally took it away. In the video you could see Mason standing there in his warehouse uniform watching them take his car away, and honestly, looking at it now in retrospect, I should probably feel sorry, but I don't. Today I'm in a completely different place. I'm still working at the same agency. In fact, they just offered me a promotion to senior creative director with a 20% raise. I bought the apartment I wanted with the money I was saving after cutting off my family, plus a reasonable mortgage. I'm dating a girl I met a few months ago, Sarah, who's a lawyer, and when I told her this whole story, she was completely supportive and even helped me with some of the legal aspects. My family? My mom eventually started sending me messages again. Not asking for money, but just wanting to know how I am. Which I guess is progress. My dad called me a few weeks ago to tell me he respects my decision, that he understands why I did what I did, and that he's working full-time now at the hardware store, and he's okay. Mason is still at the warehouse. I guess he's finally learning what it's like to work, although according to Emily, he's still constantly complaining and blaming me for all his problems. The other night I was on my balcony, looking at the city, drinking a beer that costs what Mason probably makes in an hour, and I realized I don't feel bad. Not at all. I spent years feeling guilty, feeling responsible for my family's well-being, sacrificing my own financial future to support people who not only didn't appreciate it but literally stole from me. And now, with all the drama, with all the guilt my mom tried to make me feel, with all the relatives that Emily says criticize me at family gatherings I no longer attend, I feel free. Strangely, completely free. Will I talk to my family again normally? Someday? I don't know. Maybe. But it's going to be on my terms, and I'm definitely never giving them a single cent again. I learned there's a difference between helping your family and letting them use you, and what they did for years was use, not accept help. And frankly, seeing Mason with his wages garnished, without a car, working in a warehouse after years of doing nothing, is exactly the dose of reality he needed. Sometimes the best help you can give someone is letting them face the consequences of their actions, no matter how hard it is.